Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Between the Sharks. Today, we have a lot to unpack. Speaking of unpacking, I received this in the mail last night and went ahead and opened it because when you receive something in the mail you spend a lot of money on and the box has a dent or two in it, you want to make sure you're doing all right. All right, gang, I was hoping to do this in more of a better video, but you spend $1,000 on the internet, you get something in the mail that's kind of wanged up. Makes you start thinking, I'd open that and make sure it's okay. If it's okay, then we'll deep dive. If it's not okay, well, that'll be different. We'll see. You here, gang. Cool. Breather. Bottle bracket holder on our Magoo. Return springs. Well, I'm gonna clean up this mess, and then we're gonna do a tale of two tripowers. Now that we're back, we are looking at two very similar, but yet extremely different things here. To my right, I have an Edelbrock tripower intake with 3 original OG Stromberg 97 carburetors. To my left, I have an Edelbrock tripower intake with 3 Super 97, 9 Super 7, Speedway brand new repop 97 carburetors. There were a lot of reasons I got interested in this thing, and I don't know. So today, we're gonna go over them visually, what I know about them, what I don't know about them, compare these two particular, but very similar, but very different. Is that the thing? These two different tri-power setups for a small block Chevy. Let's get into it. Exhibit A. This is a setup I had to have for the first build I ever did, which is the 1954 Chevrolet Custom in the other garage, the chopped gray and white guy. It doesn't really make sense for the car, but at the time, it was my first car. I was trying to get all the hot rodness shoved in there that I possibly could. Now, a C355 intake manifold made by Edelbrock, which is actually made for 4-bolt Rochester carburetors. Before I received it, somebody had modified it by drilling and filling, various holes to make it a 3-bolt carburetor pattern, which fits your Stromberg 97s and your Holly 94s. I ended up with 1 small logo 97 and 2 big logo 97s. I did everything I could possibly think of to make this thing run right on a 283. And I don't think I ever succeeded. I ran only the center carb, and then I ran only the outer 2 carbs, and then I ran a straight linkage, and then a progressive linkage. I rejetted, and it all ran poorly. There's a good reason for that. You can see that it's on this table, which means it came off the car some time ago when it got replaced with a 4-barrel that runs significantly better. Must be an episode of Between the Sharks because everybody in the neighborhood has broken out their leaf blowers. Exhibit B, or 2, or D. A brand new Edelbrock intake, C357 model, which is in fact made for 3-bolt carburetors. Now the curious thing about this is these are repop Strombergs. They call them 9 Super 7s or Super 79s or Spray 77 or whatever it is. It's basically a newly manufactured Stromberg style carburetor. And from the looks of it, we'll go side by side here in a second. They look pretty similar. This feels a little cheatery, but we're gonna have that argument with ourselves also here in a moment. This is an arrangement that was never really seen in the wild. Speedway's done some modifications here that should really help us out. All right, gang, so I've moved them side by side so we really can kind of look them up and down, notice all the differences, and decide whether it matters or if it's important to us. And for some of us folks, it will indeed be, and for the rest of us, you know, we'll let it be what it is. You'll notice the original Stromberg carburetors have a patent stamp on the fuel bowl. You'll also notice that these, the throttle shaft ends, I guess, they've got a rivet style mount with a little bit of a punch kind of thing holding it on, and they are cast. If we move over to the new Speedway carburetors, you'll see there is a lack of patent stamp on here. You'll notice that the end of the throttle shaft is threaded and has a bolt in it, and that all of these parts are not cast, but in fact stamped in some way or another. That said, if you get into TRIPOWER stuff with the originals, you're often going to end up with this type of linkage anyway, because sometimes you have to change the throttle shaft to put a longer one in the center. But let's go around to the other side and then we'll talk about that. But what I'm saying is, sometimes, unless you work extra hard to retain your cast ends on your throttle shafts, you'll end up with something more like this from, I think it's Vintage Speed in Florida. I can't remember. There's a company that sells tons and tons of Stromberg original and repop parts. They're the guys to go to if you got to rebuild your Strombergs. If I can remember who they are, I'll put a link in the description. I'm not sponsored. They got me everything I needed to build these originals. On the other side, you can see the very iconic 97s. This is the big logo. That's the little logo. On the Speedway carburetors, they've actually cast in the circle for the 97. However, there is no 97 on it. I do believe these things will age down. This is what they would look like if I had them clean, dipped, and anodized. I didn't. I just cleaned them and rebuilt them, tried to run them on and on and on. So the actual look, the actual finish is not, it's not terribly different. I wouldn't get too hung up on that, but there are these two telltale signs that say this is not the real deal. These are two very similar things, but they feel very different. This one drips authenticity. This one drips bogus. So why would a guy building a car even bother? I got a set of original Strombergs on the shelf. Why would I spend $1,000 on another intake and another set of carburetors? Well, there's kind of a reason. One of the main things about this rig that Speedway did that's fantastic, they have created two different sets of Stromberg bases that work with these Stromberg carburetors. But most importantly, something that was never done originally with Stromberg carburetors was they have a primary and a secondary base. Now that means your primary base has an idle circuit and a power valve. Power valve on all three? I don't know. I gotta double check. But the short version is in the bases. These screws down here are what control the idle circuit. You will notice on the two outer carburetors, the secondaries, there's no idle circuit on the Speedway bases. That is because you only want one idle circuit. It's only one thing to tune. It will make your car drivable and idleable. Idleable? It will allow it to idle. This side, on the other hand, every single one of these bases has an idle circuit, which is the potential for many vacuum leaks or extra idle. Back in the day, they would just block those off, like completely. Like, these things are worth their weight in gold. So I don't know about you, but I am certainly not permanently modifying the base of a Stromberg carburetor. So I started looking into buying new bases for my old carburetors. In addition, the throttle shafts, after 70 years of doing this, basically wear out the casting of the base. Now there's a whole system. You can buy a bushing, you can ream it out, you can put in an oversized throttle shaft, but man, that's a ton of work and you might do it wrong. These bases are brand new. They have zero wear in there, in theory. So there's no vacuum leak at the throttle shaft. If you're trying to tune 3 carburetors and at least one of them has a leak somewhere in the base, whether it's from the idle circuit or the throttle shaft, you are in for a world of hurt. Endless tuning, endless chasing things down, endless motor running like crap. It's a problem. We have two very different things, yet they're very similar, and we're gonna put them on a hot rod. So let's start from the top, right? You know, why tripower? Well, I think it looks cool. And not only does it look cool to have 3 carburetors, in my opinion, but I like all the mechanism. I like the fuel lines, I like the linkages, I like everything kind of moving at once. It looks like a functioning machine. But then it has to be said that in a system like this, most perfectly tuned and working on its best day, it still is unlikely to perform better than an out-of-the-box 4-barrel carburetor. But tuning them correctly is significantly harder than tuning a 4-barrel. So already we're doing this out of vanity, but isn't that why we're doing all of this? It's all for fun and vanity and our own amusement and things we like, because if it was 100% about reliability, well, we could go pick up a brand new Toyota, you know? So, considering we're building a hot rod and we're doing this about vanity, is this an imposter? Is this a lie? Is this the only way to be like hot rod cool? Well, I don't know. I don't think so. So one of the debates about hot rodding, in my opinion, is what are we doing here? Because at this point, we're mimicking what was done in the heyday of hot rodding, most of us. We're not trying to break new ground. We're actually trying to recreate old ground. 40s and 50s style hot rods. And for me, as you can tell, I sort of tend to modify them for modern driving because speed limits are now 70 miles an hour. We need to survive out there, gang. That said, does this become total imposter? I mean, if you start thinking about it, right? Let's say we were building a car in the mid-50s. Strombergs were still available on the shelf, and if not off the shelf, they were available relatively low mileage on a bagajillion junkyard cars. They do look cooler than these. Am I trying to fool anyone by running these carburetors? Because anybody that knows what a Stromberg 97 is will know that this is not one. So what does it all mean? I mean, why do it? Why not run this thing? There's 2 things, 3 things, 4 things. Time, money, and reliability. I spent basically $1,000 on this rig 20 years ago. I spent $1,000 on this rig this week. This is clearly the coolest thing I have, but to get this to run the way I think this would have required $400 in brand new bases. Why $400 in brand new bases? Because I cannot bring myself to block these idle circuits off completely. It doesn't feel right because I can't undo that. And these are original Strombergs. So rather than butcher up the idle circuits and all of these throttle shafts are worn enough to have a vacuum leak, which makes this completely untunable as it is, I'd have to put new bushings, new shafts, and block idle screws. It's a lot of work, and there's a lot of danger in screwing up something good. Now, over here, in theory, I've got a system more complicated than a 4-barrel, but still looks pretty cool. It's not going to convince anyone that they're Stromberg 97s, but it is still a tripower setup, which looks like a machine that makes, you know, all the throttle pieces move at once and everything kind of moves in unison. And it's pretty cool, and this should be tunable for the street. Now the car behind me, I've made no bones about the type of car we're building. I put disc brakes in it because I want my friends to be able to drive it and be safe. In addition, I don't want them stalling out, A, and having trouble just anywhere, but B, There's nothing scarier than stalling out in traffic and not being able to restart your car. So this will give me enough cool factor for me, enough fun in tuning the carburetors, enough fun in tuning the linkages, and yet, hopefully, enough reliability to pass the keys around to a friend and not be worried about it. That brings us to this. So what happens now? What do we do with this thing? Well, we're gonna run it. That's exactly what we're gonna do. This level of authentic pieces, original hot rodium, this is gonna go on our Roadster, I think. We're gonna run our F1 brakes. We're gonna run more traditional hot rod parts. We're probably gonna go completely fenderless. And on this one, our 4-seater family ride, we're running disc brakes, full fenders. We'll put a cool aftermarket tri-power setup on it. And I think that'll be, you know, good enough for us. Not only is it hot rodding a compromise when it comes to fitment of your parts, like you guys all watch me do on every single piece I put on that car, it's also a constant assessment and compromise about what you're even trying to do here. These days, people will pick your stuff apart over everything. If you're going super traditionalist, more power to you. Enjoy it. Have fun with it. I'm going for hot rod style with drivability because that's how I want to use the car. 20 years ago, if that had been available, I would have scoffed at it. Now I go, huh, that's a pretty darn good idea. This thing will never not be cool. It's just dripping history and tradition. And there's something so fantastic about that. And these kinds of parts are so much fun to seek out and find. And this is one of the forever struggles with hot rodding and cool points and traditional and not traditional or whatever, nostalgic. There's a lot of words for it. This stuff will never, ever not be cool, in my opinion. And this is a little bit of a bogus, inauthentic imposter in the style of hot rodding. But I'm getting to be okay with that because the reality is hot rodding requires a monumental amount of restoration to get in the game at this point. Unless you can afford a really good original body, you either need to restore a piece of junk or do what other people do and buy a, you know, brand new 32 Roadster made out of steel from Brookville. Is that real? Even if it's full of Stromberg parts, or do you need to have a real body and does this make it inauthentic? Like, I don't know, you gotta make up your own minds. I mean, I will say that chasing tradition has taught me a lot of things. I've learned a lot about the history of hot rodding, about the parts that were used, and I will forever appreciate that knowledge. But when it comes to practical application, starting with something like this is a lot more similar to what the garage heroes of the 50s started with than this. Those guys were not restoring 80-year-old carburetors to put on their street car. It's a lot of ideas in conflict, really, you know? That is not a bad looking rig. That is a great looking rig. But on the surface, outside of the 97s missing and the patent markers, which are indeed very, very, very cool castings, honestly, I would never try to pass these off as actual Stromberg 97s. This is just gonna be a tri-power intake. That's what we're gonna do. So I'm kind of glad that the originals bear some differences from the repops. This is gonna meet my needs for the type of car I'm building, the sacrifices I'm making for drivability, and still give me the fun of still getting to tune a tri-power carburetor setup. It's gonna be a lot easier to tune than this one, not because there's anything wrong with these, but because they're worn slap out. Don't get me wrong. Tuning a tri-power setup, this is not bolt on and go. The guy I bought this from didn't really get it right, pulled it off and put a 4-barrel on. there's still the magic of learning to operate your machine with a setup like this. And that to me is the fun of it. I'll put this on, we'll tune this little 283, see if we can make it do all the things we want it to do well. Start, idle, run, and like get into full boogie mode. This is so great for treasure hunting. This is so great for a period correct hot rod or nostalgia traditional thing. But this is also a pitfall for a former version of me and maybe some of you fellas out there, where tuning a tripower is its own sort of thing that you have to learn how to do. And if you rebuild some carburetors, you can do the kit, you can do the jets, you can do all the stuff. But if you don't know how to do the work to stop every single vacuum leak due to a worn throttle shaft or an idle circuit that won't close or whatever, you're in for a battle you will lose with a poorly running motor that runs inconsistently. And for me, sadly, it caused me to not drive my 1954 Chevrolet very often because it was not nearly as reliable as it should have been with a newly rebuilt 283 small block. That cost me a lot of time and enjoyment on my car. So I've learned that, but it took a long time and created a certain amount of distrust in my own work when the reality was I didn't know how to identify bad worn out parts or know the consequences of them. So anyway, I'm super looking forward to putting this on, seeing how it runs, seeing how tunable it is, and in the long run, I am invested in getting this setup actually right and back on the road. Oh, gang, these are good philosophical questions to have. I hope this was at least food for some thought, and maybe interesting to see the two setups directly side by side. There are definitely some big tells on what's not original, but outside of that, man, they're close. Anyway, thanks for watching Between the Sharks. Good luck on your projects out there. I am really excited to have this. So now stay tuned. We're gonna have to test this 283 and the other 283 that's back in the corner and see if they're any good. And if so, we're gonna be one step closer to putting that on something and seeing how it does. Good luck on your projects out there. We'll see you next time on Between the Sharks.